You're listening to Girls with Grafts, a burn community podcast created by Phoenix Society for Burn Survivors, a leading nonprofit dedicated to supporting the burn community. In this podcast, we'll talk with burn survivors, share resources to help with supporting and improving burn recovery, and discuss how to prevent burn injuries. Here are your hosts, burn survivors and Phoenix Society's marketing team, Amber Wilcox and Rachel Kudlak.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Girls with Grafts. I am Rachel Kudlak. I'm one of the hosts of the show, and today I'm joined by my lovely co-host, Amber Wilcox.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm doing well. It's always bittersweet when we kind of wrap up a podcast season, but it's always so fun to look back and think about all the 15 guests or plus that we've had on this season, and I'm excited to take a little break for summer.
Are you ready for some Big Brother? I'm counting down the days.
I know. I'm so excited. I'm also, I don't know if I should share this, but I do watch Love Island, and that is 5 days a week.
I can't say that I do.
Well,
but I'm ready for some Big Brother. I have nothing to watch now that Survivor's over, and I think of you every time I need some good reality TV.
Yeah,
so
every Wednesday when we're trying to fill the void in our lives that
Survivor. I know. I was like, I need it to come back now. Okay, well, today's podcast is powered by the Donor Alliance Foundation and the Brookby Foundation. We're grateful for their generous support in helping us share burn community resources. Learn more at donoralliancefoundation.org and thebrookbyfoundation.org. With that said, Rachel, would you introduce today's guest?
Yes, so today we have on Carolyn Mae Kim. Carolyn is an accredited public relations professional, speaker, and author recognized for leading teams and crafting purpose-driven communication that builds trust and advances meaningful impact. She's also the proud mother of a resilient and inspiring fourth grader who is a burn survivor, a role that has profoundly shaped her perspective in advocacy, empathy, and authentic connection. So thank you so much, Carolyn, for coming on the show today.
Oh, it's an honor. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, to get started, we always like to hear a little bit about who's on our show, and how you're connected to the burn community. So if you don't mind, if you could share that with us today, that would be wonderful.
Absolutely. I am the mother of a burn survivor. He was an infant when he was burned, 8 months old. And so a little bit about our family is he's now in fourth grade, thriving and loving life. But I would say, as most parents that I know that have entered through their children becoming burn survivors, it was a very stark change in our family story and history. So at 8 months, we ended up in the hospital, the burn intensive care unit. He ended up needing surgery, and lots of engagement with the burn community after, from visits with surgeons and doctors and our local clinic. The burn community really became a second family to us. We look forward to the Christmas party every year. We go to the summer events together, and I can't think of a better community to join, even though everyone, I think, would like to be able to not have such a painful part of their story. There's something really beautiful about what happens in the burn community. And so I get to joyfully be part of things with other parents, but I also get to see the value that my kiddo has gained from being part of the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and can you kind of take us back, in those first kind of early days and weeks after your son's injury, kind of what feelings and emotions were you having at the time? And is there something that you wish you would have known, back then?
Oh my gosh, yes. My little one just passed his 8-year burn anniversary. So we've had a lot of time to kind of think back on it. And the early days, weeks, months, everyone handles it differently. It's unique for each person. But for me, it was a really dark season. I definitely grappled with a lot of grief and guilt, a lot of almost shame as a parent who had such a tiny little one that depended on us for everything. have something so hard happen to them at such an early stage. And I still remember it like it was yesterday. Every moment from going to the doctor right after the burn to sitting in the emergency room to the doctors we met, it's all very much a core part of my memory. And what I found is once we were out of the BICU, the burn intensive care unit, my little one was on his road to recovery, but I kind of entered this phase of always being on, always wanting to make sure I was by his side, dedicated to nothing ever happening to him again in his life. And that led to a lot of interesting experiences for our family of what it would actually look like to thrive. I think everyone's journey is unique, but coming to terms with the reality of what happened and actually holding the reality of being a burn survivor, of my child being a burn survivor, of me being a parent who had a little one burned, it took a long time for me to really integrate that that was part of our story. And so that first year was hard. I kept him inside a lot because I didn't want sun to influence how his graft was healing or how he would recover. So the poor kid got no time outdoors, and I wouldn't sleep very much because I wanted to be on just in case he needed something. So lots of signs that I wasn't in a great place, but I was really thankful for resources that were available. We had parent support groups through our local hospital, and I participated in those. There were a lot of great resources through the Phoenix Burn Society, and it just so happened that within that first year, the World Burn Congress was right in our local area, and I attended that, and I would say that was one of the most crucial components to my being able to move through adopting and understanding my own story as a parent of a burn survivor.
Mm. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. And I know you talked a little bit about that guilt, that parent guilt that you had. Kind of what helped you, I guess, overcome that? I know you said the first year was obviously a very long year, but I guess we hear that all the time from parents that they have so much guilt for, what happened to their child. So what tips or advice would you want to share with some other parents?
I think have a lot of grace for yourself. I've had the privilege of sitting with a lot of parents, both in support groups where I am receiving just as much as also being a peer support for other parents. And whether you are there or not, whether you feel like you helped cause something that caused it or you were just absent, I think one of the most common traits I see is that us parents have a lot of guilt. And so, first of all, know that that is something we share because I think we're parents who love deeply. And that's a good thing that we love our children. And as parents, we carry a lot of responsibility and we prepare so much for being parents and learning how to care for our children that when something so out of our control, or even what we felt like was in our control, happens, there is this spiraling to make sense and meaning. And part of it, I think, stems from our desire to make sure something bad doesn't happen again. So if we can reason our way through it and find a way to absorb, oh, it's I hold responsibility because I'm at fault, therefore you almost have control in the future. It's
Mm.
almost a coping mechanism a little bit because it was so scary. Parents are so scared when this happens and it's so unknown. The advice I think I would give is be kind to yourself. Know that you are on a journey, and just like your child is healing, you will heal. And just like burns kind of go through their own process, no one's burn heals the same way, no parent heals the same way. And I would really encourage parents to get involved in the burn community. It was powerful for me to sit in a room with other moms and say the things that I felt like I couldn't say, like,
Mm.
I feel responsible. I feel like I made the worst mistake as a parent because for me, I wasn't there. My little one was with a caretaker at the time. And I feel like my absence caused his pain. How can I ever do something again? What am I going to do when he asks where I was? All of the things just poured out. And it was a safe space. And there was no judgment. And to hear so many other parents meet me right where I was at, we all had different stories. Everything is unique, but they were able to be probably some of the only people in the entire universe that could look me in the eye and say, actually, you are a good parent. And this is dark and it is hard and you will get through it. So finding that community is powerful because you feel you carry the guilt, and it's a really unique area. I did not know anyone in the burn community before we entered it. So you kind of have this unknown community and this huge guilt. And when you can lean into the community, it can help you not carry so much blame and shame that it keeps you from healing and keeps you from being able to create a place where your child will thrive.
Definitely.
I want to talk for a moment about the support. So, you and your husband obviously went through this together, and so that can be an interesting. Like, I know having a child in general can put a strain on a relationship. Never mind having a child that's been injured. Can you talk a little bit about that for me?
Yeah. I feel very lucky. My husband is incredible, and we both lived, slept, stayed at the Big U and the Ronald McDonald House. So we were in it together. And we also had very different personal experiences of what happened. He actually got to the house first when we got the call that something had happened. So he was first engaged. He was very calm. When we were in the hospital, it was day 2, I think, that they were trying to determine how deep the burn was because it had to finish its process. And I remember being in that room as things happened. There was gasps in the room, which you never want to hear as a mom. I completely became a puddle and lost it. I'm pretty sure for the rest of the time, everyone had a note about me like, be careful, she's in her journey. My husband was cool, calm, and collected. He was the one who was able to talk to the surgeons immediately after, asking really good questions. And so we were both in very different spots, and we leaned on those strengths because he could engage it in a very different place than I could. I think also because I went so deep and dealt with so much guilt quickly, for him, it kind of came more later. It was several months down the road that it started to settle for him. And in some ways, I've often wondered whether that's because I was just struggling so hard and he was showing up in his way. But what we did have is, I'm thankful we never were blaming each other. It's very common for that to happen because you're in so much pain. I think instead we were both blaming ourselves a lot more. And so we were able to speak into that. And for me, I used resources a lot. He was feeling in a different spot. So he didn't necessarily go to the support groups the first year or areas like that, but he was all in with compression garments and how much to learn about them and all the questions to ask and how do we care about them. And I think it was helpful that we were in different places. And I think the number one thing that helped is we talked a lot and almost with the same ground rules as a support group, like no judgment. We're going to say what we're feeling. We're going to say where we are, and then we're going to move forward together. And that really was crucial because to be both all in, but both in such different places and experiencing it so differently required a lot more communication to understand the other person.
Now, you said there was a caregiver at the time, correct? So I'm sure that also, I think about like the level of trust I have to have for that, right? That person. I'm sure that put some concerns on your own. I know Rachel was with a caregiver at the time of her injury, so she probably also like understands this, but there has to be a level of that you're worried about. Yes.
100%. So she was a nanny and we did not have her return after that. In fact, I don't think I left my child alone for about 4 years. He was always with my husband or I.
Yeah.
And even now, I mean, he's in 4th grade and he's so ready to do things. And I do not let him out of my sight. And I am so much more all about the questions because I thought everything was good before. And it was, you mentioned that you talk about ways to prevent burn injuries. She had chosen to cook and had him in a baby carrier frontward facing, and that's where the burn happened. So I am constantly vigilant. I do not let him go anywhere. And in some ways, sometimes I feel bad about that. And in other ways, that's where I think grace comes in for ourselves as parents. And I I acknowledge that I do have great fears, but I think it's grounded in something that happened. So his life has looked different. We never got another caretaker. We adjusted our work schedules. I have changed my entire career. I work from home now, and not in a way to keep him from things, but that trust is hard to leave your child with someone else.
Yeah, it definitely is. I'm going through that right now, and I'm so thankful that we have such a wonderful nanny, but there is always that level of trust of like making sure. But we did have a nanny before this that we didn't have that same level of trust with. And I think it, and obviously my son didn't have a burn injury as a result of it, but it always puts that fear in the back of your head of like the good questions to ask. The communication is really important. My husband and I both work from home, but I think if we didn't have that communication with our nanny, like you have to have good communication and you have to make sure that they know like your stance on things. And sometimes I think I've seen other friends have like difficulty with having tough conversations with their caregivers. And it's not easy to be a manager of anything, but like you have to have those hard conversations, especially when it comes to your kid. And we learned the hard way, but it's definitely something that like, if you don't, that was part of I was like, what happened after that? Because I know like I had trauma around that previous nanny. So I can only imagine that having something like that happen, like it would be a long time before I'd be able to trust anyone again. So I completely understand that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know, as Amber mentioned, my injury happened when I was being watched by a babysitter, and pretty sure after that, now I'm thinking about it, I've only ever had like other family members or my sister who was older than me, then eventually just would watch me. No one else would. So, I mean, that's definitely a completely normal thing. I mean, that can be scary regardless if your child had an injury or not, just leaving your child in the hands of someone else. But, and I know you talked a little bit too about how you and your husband communicated and, how you both healed it separately. And I think that's a really good thing to point out for our other parents and caregivers listening that, I think it's important that you and your partner would communicate about how you're feeling, the injury, the healing, but also to have your separate outlets, whether that's for you to go to support group and be able to say whatever you want to say and not have to worry about hurting anyone's feelings or hurting your husband's feelings and just being open and honest. So I think that's a really powerful thing that I would encourage our parents to engage in.
Yeah, I think that's
I often find
an interesting resource opportunity too, of like difficult questions to ask, right? Like when we did our interviewing, we always had like some basic questions, but also like, are you first aid certified? Or, are you willing to learn? Like, or are you familiar with, and then I always had like a contract written up, like a lot of friends and don't think of doing that, but like, if you need to remove that person from your home, like there are checks and things that you should have in place, but there's also like hard conversations that you do have to have with them. And it's never easy. Right. But like these are the things like you don't think you have to say, but not everyone understands that. So I think that's a great opportunity, Rachel.
It is helpful. It's also interesting to think about. So we had the questions and the contract in place, but I think looking back, and what I recommend all my friends now, to the point of difficult conversations, is list your non-negotiables, even if they sound weird. So if we were to do it again, and what I've recommended to friends is if you have a caretaker, there's no cooking in the kitchen. They can bring like a boxed lunch, but while they are caring for the child, no cooking. If you have an exercise room, there's no child that goes near things like treadmills or anything like that. No playing on them, no being around them. And the list can get quite long. So I also recommend sometimes, if my list is huge, because we have family members now, so I have a huge list. It's almost easier to flip it and say, here's the things that I would like to occur. Like, you guys can play in the living room. Here's the things that can happen. You can walk outside. Here's the spots you can go. And that way I had to do less of coming up with all of the options, because it's amazing how many options can go wrong. and instead create a path of where they go. So it can
driving
feel
was a
like
whole other
lot.
thing for us too. We were like, no, we're just not comfortable with that, but we'll take you anywhere you want to go and let you guys hang out in a specific location. That was a big one. There were quite a few that, right? Like and we're thankful, like we also assist with like his lunch for the day, right? Like if you're not sure what to make him, we'll help you. Like the communication piece is, I think, a big part of it, right? Of like understanding where we do and don't, or like if you're going to leave the house, text us just so we know, right? Like there are small little things that like sound dumb, but like you said, are just, I have fear of like, okay, if my son is missing and they come and they ask me where he is and I'm like, I don't know, right? That is important. So I think it's good to kind of have that clear communication with that person, but there is a level of like trust that's developed over time. So like the first 3 weeks that our nanny was here, like I didn't want to let him out of my sight, right? Like, no, you're not going on a walk right now, right? So it took a minute before I made sure that person understood me, and a lot of times I'd blame it on myself, right? It's about me. Literally has nothing to do with you. It's my fears and how I feel. But I think that's a great call out.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, I want to switch gears a little bit because Carolyn, I know you've written articles for us before, and we'll make sure we have those linked below in our show notes for our listeners to take a look at. But you talk about a lot about, advocating for your child, especially when they're so young and they have no idea what's going on. But, can you talk a little bit of just, how you became an advocate for your son's care and, maybe what you wish you would have known earlier on?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different places I learned to gain an advocate voice. First would be immediately when it happens in the BICU. You are immersed in a new area, burn care, and you know nothing about it. But what you do know is your child. You know things like feeding schedules, naps, regular responses to things. And so it's really important. At 8 months, he was pre-verbal, could say nothing. He learned to sit up in the hospital, actually. And being able to communicate what was normal for him. He was also a preemie, so he had a different way of eating and managing foods. Being able to voice that so people would understand, it's really important. And we did our best to make the hospital room as child-friendly as possible. They're not really always child-friendly, and the team was amazing. But we had toys that were brought into the room and a mat for him, and we would do tummy time, and we would practice sitting up. We're trying to, and then he got there. But though you are with a team specializing in burns, and often they will have pediatric specialties, but they're not there to parent and think about oh yeah, typically this is his schedule. So it's helpful as a parent to advocate for that. And then once you leave, I found it that I needed to advocate for him a lot in front of other humans. So when I finally took him out again, like to grocery stores, for example, it was really important because kids absorb so much to me that he knew he was a burn survivor. He was strong. He was resilient. And people inherently would come up and do like a sad face. Oh, poor kiddo. And that's not what I wanted. Plus, I was in my own journey as well and feeling like, don't make this worse. Just let us grocery shop. So I worked with some tools from the Phoenix Burn Society to get me a script that I could immediately go in. And the script accomplished a couple things. It communicated outward what was there. People are not familiar necessarily with the burn community or how to respond. And for him, depending on where we were, they wouldn't even know he was a burn survivor because we would put clothes over pieces, or like he had a sock on his hand. All they saw was it looked like he could have had a broken arm or something. So advocating that he's okay right now, and also speaking about his identity to them. And he's great. I love his smile, whatever it would take, and just reframe it. So that became what I did in the first year and a half with him as he was gaining it. Since then, I mean, he's older, and I think every year I'm learning he is processing his identity different. And part of my advocating for him has included speaking to him about his right to feel how he feels about it in any given day. Some days he's super sad and he wants to know if he's always going to look like that. Do scars ever go away? does every kid have a scar? So giving him the space to do that and then speaking truth for him, and then continuing to help him find a place of thriving. He now gets to know many burn survivors. We recently moved, we're still settling in, and there was a kiddo at his one of the sports he does that is also a burn survivor. And he came home so excited to tell me about it. And we're so alike, Amma, which is mom in Korean. And there's all of these great things. So to be with him in that is a form of advocacy for him. It's letting him know you can celebrate things. It's letting him know this is a beautiful part. It says something powerful about him to be a burn survivor. So being in all those places, I think, are forms of advocacy.
I love that. And what a fun surprise to find a peer and like a friend that's also a survivor. That has to be just so fun for them. You know, like you said, I'm sure there's times where you feel like you're the only survivor in the world, but now you're so young and can already kind of have that friendship over it. That's awesome.
I want to talk a little bit about how he handles his communication with his story. That's a big part of like the advocacy piece, right? But does he talk about it? Like, is he walking around the house every day talking about it? Or is it something that he, what does that look like?
Yeah. We had a really amazing child life specialist, and we talked a lot before we left the intensive care unit about what is a strong developmental way to help him grow. And one of the best pieces of advice was talk about it as a normal part of your family history. Don't have it be this scary thing. Don't have it be the on the side thing. And so from a very young age, we actually make an annual book of pictures. We have multiple spreads in our picture book of this experience. And it would be different for everyone. So this worked for us, maybe not everyone's thing. We have pictures of the injury from 30 minutes after it happened through his entire journey to when we ended up on the last time we went to the clinic and we found out that we didn't have to regularly go. Like, it was a big, sad moment at the same time. So he has this story. And every time he asks, we tell him anything he asks. We tell it often and frequently. We also have a photo wall on our kitchen area that's just really happy memories. We happened to be in the hospital over Cinco de Mayo, and Minnie Mouse came to visit all the kids. And so there's a really sweet picture of him with Minnie Mouse. And we chose that one to have there as a reminder of, that's when you were in the hospital, and this is that part. So we've made it not hard to talk about his burn. He has had the vocabulary from the time he started speaking, even though he doesn't remember those events personally. And people ask, so he's heard us talk about it. And then for a while, I would say when he was about 4, he actually became super proud of it. He would introduce himself and it would be his differential. He felt like it was his Superman sign. So he'd be like, "Hi, and he'd give his name and then say, "And I'm a burn survivor. Want to see?" And so for a while, we were like,
That's awesome.
Like, I don't want to diminish that. After a while, I had to be like, "Hey, buddy, like, maybe we won't tell everybody. Maybe let them respond with their name and we'll see where it goes." But for that season, it was important that he got to lead with name and his perception of identity. Now that he's a little older, he does not introduce it, but he does pretty good at responding if anyone asks about it, because his scar is visible. People can see it. And so he responds more to peers asking versus leading with it now. And I don't know what it'll be like in future seasons, but that has been how he tells it. He doesn't have shame with it at all. He has some sorrow with it sometimes because he doesn't want to be different, but he also has many moments of pride because of how we have framed it as part of his story and who he is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can relate a lot to that too. I was burned when I was 3, but I can't remember a time where I wasn't a burn survivor, and can't remember a time where it wasn't like part of my identity, obviously. But, we did talk about it as a family. It wasn't something, and I get it. It can be a hard conversation. And I'm sure I've asked my parents some really hard questions when I was younger about it and cried over it and complained about it. But at the end of the day, I think, kind of instilling that like empowerment to own it is so, so important. Especially as, from kids to adolescents, teenagers, young adults, there's a lot of different life stages that you have to almost like re-own your scars in each of those as well. So I mean, I think that's awesome that when he was younger, he would just go up and introduce himself that way. And I love the Minnie Mouse, picture idea. I think that's such a good idea of having like a happy memory in the hospital. That way it's not something that you just kind of shove to the side and don't want to think about. Yeah.
It's interesting. When I went to the World Burn Congress, they had a session for parents that talked about the psychological development that's just normal from, I think they started at infant to like 35. And then they layered that over with the self-identity journey of burn survivors and talked about how parents can intersect with a normal psychological development and what that might look like at different stages. And I think you're so right. It seems to change constantly because all of us are humans. We're constantly forming our identity and making sense of who we are. And then when you layer that on with being a burn survivor, there's so many nuances to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember, when I was a teenager, there were times that, I hated being a burn survivor. I didn't want to be different. Why was this me? But then I would get to go do something fun. Like I got to go to Israel in 9th grade for a camp. And then of course that was like the number one thing I wanted all of my friends to know about. So it'll obviously always ebb and flow. And even as adults, it ebbs and flows still. So yeah, that's great. And I know you kind of shared about how he was kind of proud and, introducing himself that way. Has there been anything else that's kind of surprised you about how he talks about his scars or his story?
I think something that surprised me is maybe the questions he asks about his story, especially early on. I would perceive the questions differently than he was. For example, where were you? That question instantly triggered a lot of guilt. And I was feeling like, oh, he's making sense of his story as I was gone. I was not there. I didn't protect him. The first couple times did not handle it calmly. I actually would cry in my response to him and apologize. And I remember one time he stopped me and he's like, no. I'm not angry. I'm not blaming you. I just want to understand. And that was an interesting moment to me that he was not bringing in blame, shame, or guilt. He was wanting to make sense and try to figure it out because he was building it. He didn't have memories of it. So that was an interesting part to me. And then it's interesting being part of the burn community because he's able to go, and our community would have the Christmas parties, for example, and it is burn survivors from infants to adults. It's the entire community and all the families. And it has been interesting to me for him to tell his story and make sense of it in light of understanding other burn survivors as well and recognizing commonalities like, oh, we all have this in common. There's a self-identification with a group versus necessarily a self-identification with just a part of something that happened to him. And I think that surprised me for someone so young. I didn't realize for him, he would belong at such an early age. For him, it's his group.
Mm-hmm.
I think it surprises us. It always surprises us. I know like my son is wise beyond his years, and it always like surprises me to hear the things that like he comes out with sometimes, and you just think, wow, I think that they are more in like thinking more than we even think that they are at times. So sounds like he's got a good head on his shoulders.
Yeah.
I feel really lucky. It sounds like our kids would get along well. He is a very thoughtful kid and he's super responsible. So he's the one who remembers sunscreen over his scar much more than I do. I do remember it. That makes me sound awful, but like he's the one who's proactively putting it on. And I'm like, hey buddy, we're inside. You're okay. You don't need it right now.
Right.
And he is also really good at like, we use a ton of Aquaphor because the scar just continues to need it. So he has tubs around the house and he's so responsible with it and he's so good about it. And he's thoughtful about what his future looks like. So I used to be a university professor. And when my kiddo was burned, I had a couple students who were childhood burn survivors that I did not know until they reached out to tell me. And I remember one of them telling me specifically that he was burned about the same age And there's ebbs and flows, but when you reach being a teenager, he actually mentioned, he was like, that's when it became harder. Let me know if your son wants to talk at all, because at that stage, it can be so hard when you want to be the cool one. And I've been able to tell my kiddo, like, hey, I have someone you can talk to. He's a track star. He was wildly popular. And do you know what? You guys are the same. And for him to process that too and to feel at ease. We also did a project at his 4-year burn anniversary where we had some art commissioned. And the artist was also an infant burn survivor. And it was fun for my kiddo to be like, you know what I would love to do? I want to be an artist just like Kit. I was like, you can. So he's starting to see all of the paths, which is nice.
I think it also is just shows that it's more common than we think. Like a lot of the time you don't realize that there are so many folks. And I know I did some pretty outward sharing of my story when it first happened. And it is surprising to hear how many folks say like, oh, my dad was burned and I didn't realize what he went through, or so-and-so. Like, I think when we share our stories, it tends to also bring out others feeling comfortable to share and help resonate. So I think that's awesome to hear that like there is a community. And like you said, there are more than we think, which also, again, scares you a little bit into saying like, okay, for young kids, like it shows us how much more important it is to advocate for safety with children, especially when it comes to caregivers, right? So it just gives you like a perspective and an understanding, especially if you're a new parent. Like everyone always asks me like, what was the one thing you'd do? I said, listen, I had no kids at the time, but I had dogs, and my dogs were in the kitchen. Thank God, didn't get anything on them, but they were close. So like, again, nobody goes in our kitchen in our house. Like there's just no reason. If we're cooking, nobody's in the kitchen, right? Like he's either in his chair or like asleep in bed, right? Like if you're in the kitchen, you know, that you just don't want that to happen. So I think there are things that can be in place, especially as a new parent. And I think that's this conversation makes that even more relevant.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know at the beginning, Carolyn, we talked a little bit kind of about your healing journey, you and your husband's healing journey, but how has it been, you know, as an entire family healing? How do you, you know, heal together? How do you heal separately? You know, especially as kind of a burn injury, it never goes away. You're on this journey for forever. So even the transitions from, you know, 8 months to now, kind of how has that changed over time?
Really good question. I think we've all had our individual part. So my kiddo making sense, my husband doing his journey, I doing mine. I think there's things that we do together that does bring family healing. For example, the annual books, or recognizing the burn anniversary, or prioritizing things like the burn Christmas party. Those are milestones for us to come together and process it together. And I think when we have conversations together, it is a healing experience because we're all seeing it from different angles, but we're all in it together. Honestly, sometimes as a parent, it's a lot to hold that it is going to be a lifelong thing for my kiddo, because it's just so profoundly impactful. And sometimes the weight of that is hard to hold. And then in those moments, I look at him and I realize he has a boldness and a bravery and a resilience that blows my mind and makes me realize he has no problem with it being a lifelong thing, because he is not afraid of it and he's embracing it. And that actually helps me heal again and again, to see who he is because of it. And I think as a family, then we've had to lean into all the different stages. As an infant, healing looks different. He hated doing a lot of the like burn massages and wearing pressure garments, and he ate through silicone pieces. And I was like, oh my gosh, how do you eat silicone? You have to stop. That was a different journey for us than when he was a toddler and first starting to realize that none of his peers looked like him. And how did he navigate that? And then his pride as we got there, it's just up and down. And I think now that we're 8 years in, 2 things sit with me. One, we've ridden the waves. We will have really hard times ahead, and we've gone through hard times together and we've made it. And we're going to have really high moments, beautiful things. And I don't have the right words to say this. I'm always really cautious, especially on something that goes to a wide audience, because everyone's journey is different and everyone's experience is different. But there is a beauty that you gain that maybe you wouldn't have wanted to. Maybe you wouldn't have picked this journey, but there is something beautiful that comes out of it and almost repurposes. There is so much darkness in the burn. There's so much loss. I don't think I go a day without just realizing how much it still sits with me. And my kiddo has something in him that he gleaned, gained, and nurtured through this experience that makes him who he is today. And it makes our family who we are today. And I love the burn community. I love who we are. I love who he is. And his burn is a part of that story. It's inherent to it. So there's a both and that I think I hold, because on the hard days, the both and is hard, but I know there's really good days too.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. I mean, I think that's so true for all survivors, regardless of what age, you're injured at. And I mean, I obviously relate to the childhood ups and downs, but at the end of the day, like, I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't change it for the world. And I know for early survivors, that can be really harsh to hear, and you don't want to hear that. But like you said, it's a lifelong journey where we're here together. We do have this beautiful community of survivors and caregivers and burn care staff that, we all want each other to survive and thrive after their burn injury. So if you are feeling like that, we would obviously encourage you to kind of dive into that community, whether it's through your local hospital, through Phoenix Society. We do have a Phoenix World Burn Congress coming up this fall, but, just kind of diving into community, however that looks like for you.
Well, I know we're coming up on time, but before we close out, Carolyn, anything else you want to share with us on behalf of your son or yourself and that journey that you were on together?
I think I would want every parent listening, if you are in one of those dark spaces or you just entered, to know that a lot of things won't sit well with you. A lot of things you hear might not land well, and a lot of the resources, it might not be the time. And that's okay, because this is a community that has space for everyone. So if you are early on, when I was early on, it was really hard to hear anything related to this. Mm-hmm. And if you're further on, I would encourage you, really lean into the community. And if you feel like you can be there for other parents, consider being a peer advocate or support, because not only does it just bring so much joy to you, it's a repurposing. It is more common than you expect, like we talked about. And there are people who can really use someone to hold space for them as they're starting that journey. And I have found, for me, the most powerful people to hold space are the ones who have walked a little bit ahead of me, because there's a trust in the fact that you've walked there. So I would encourage, if you are hearing this and you are thinking, nope, that's okay. Don't feel bad for thinking, nope, everyone's going to be in a different place. But if you are further along, do lean in. And I think what my kiddo would want every parent to know is, you love your kid. You love them a lot. And I get emotional because I tell parents this all the time. You're a good parent. And your kid, depending their age, might not be able to tell you that yet. One question I get asked a lot, and it's a question I asked. Parents will ask me, what do you do when your kid asks, how did this happen and where were you? And some parents have told me they dread the day that's going to happen. I dreaded the day it happened. I think your kid's going to look back at you and say, I know you love me and you did everything you could. And I would want them to hear that. Wallace would want you to know that as a child burn survivor. And if your kid can't say it yet, don't be afraid of that day, because your kid isn't asking, do you love them? Your kid isn't asking, are you a good parent? Your kid isn't asking, are you qualified to be a parent? Because most of us feel unqualified after something like this happens. Your kid is making sense of a beautiful story where they know that you have been with them in the journey, and they know you are an advocate, and they know you love them. So just keep that in mind if that's something you're dreading. I think that is what he would want parents to know.
Yeah. Amber, sorry, before we ask our two final questions, I just kind of want to go off of that too. I look back at my parents, and I'm sure they were, well, I know that they felt a lot of that guilt for me growing up, but there's not a day that I ever place blame on them. If anything, I always share that I feel so grateful that I had such a good support system and had parents that, dived into my healing journey with me and took such great care of me. And that's what I remember them. I remember them always with me at the hospital, always, as much as I hated those pressure garments, making sure I wore them. And today I'm so grateful for that. But yeah, it's definitely a great thing to share with our parents. It's not always easy, of course, but like you said, your child's just trying to make sense of what's happening to them, not placing any blame.
I think it's also important. I teach my son, like, accidents are okay, right? Like, we're not going to be perfect. And I think sometimes we live in a society that wants us to be perfect. And so teaching our children that, like, you're going to make mistakes, accidents are going to happen. And whether or not, right, like, it was an accident, right? It happened. And we're doing our best to prevent, right, anything ever like that happening again. But like, that's a part of life, right? Right? Is accidents. And so I think that's a part that I always want to instill in my son, right? I'm not a perfect parent, nor will I ever be, just like you're not going to be the perfect son, right? Because there is no such thing. And I think that's important for us to teach our son is like, it's an accident, and like, stuff is going to happen. It's more about how we move on from that and learn from that. So I think it's also an important, right, a life lesson to teach our kids is like, yeah, I wasn't perfect, but I did my best to help recover from what happened, right? Well, I think that answered my question, was advice that you had. So I'm going to pass it over to Rachel to ask the final question as well.
Yeah. So our final question is our Phoenix Partner question today, sponsored by the Donor Alliance Foundation and the Brookby Foundation. So like Amber said, I think we probably touched on both of these a little, but what is one thing you hope listeners take away from, our podcast today?
You're doing your healing journey right. A lot of people will ask, am I doing this right? You are. It doesn't matter what you're feeling today, where you're at today, how you're processing it. You're doing it right.
I love that. That's a perfect ending to our season 6 of Girls with Grafts. So just want to thank you again, Carolyn, so much for coming on today. Like I said, you've written resources and blogs for Phoenix Society before, so definitely check those out. We'll have them linked below, but it's been so great having you on today's show.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes.
It was so nice to meet you.
You as well.
Bye,
have a great
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Girls with Grafts. If you are enjoying this content, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.